Hello and welcome to Dave Makes Stuff. In the last episode we got our off-road Audi TT's engine running for the first time, but it's a bit loud, because way back when we were bobtailing it to improve ground clearance at the rear, some idiot cut off the exhaust. Well, it's not going to be road legal while it sounds like Tchaikovsky's 1812 overture, so it's time to put the silencers back on it. This time raised up, so it doesn't get bashed by rocks. But first we need to sort the rest of the exhaust out a bit. The same idiot also cut through all of the studs that held it all together, admittedly because they were so rusted that the nuts didn't have any flats left on them, and I didn't want to wait another few years for them to rust away completely and fall off before I got on with the job. So we need to replace these. This isn't complicated. The grinder is good for taking the heads off, which might or might not be welded. There's really no way to tell. Then Dave smash with big hammer until all good. Then just rinse and repeat. The original stud's fitted into special oversized holes, so I can't thread or helicoil it. I'm just going to fit some bolts and then weld them from the back so they can't spin. One thing about welding bolts like this is that the weld wants to pull the bolts until they're all pointing in completely random directions, so I'm not even going to try until the bolts all have nuts on them to clamp them in position. And in pursuit of true engineering excellence, I'm even going to wire wheel the rust off the flanges, mainly because there's so much of it that I think the weld would otherwise look like expanding foam with the strength of polystyrene. After that, a good solid spot weld on each bolt will lock it in place and stop it rotating while it's pulling the flanges down. The welder then decided that now would be a great time to start playing Let's Make Dave Question His Sanity. Point the welder at the job. Fire. Foot. Burns back to the torch. Fire it at the earth clamp. Is it working? Yes. Fire it into the air. Wire feed's good. Try it on the job again. Foot. Burns back to the torch. Wire feed's too slow. Fire it in the air. No, the wire feed's fine. Fire it at the job. Foot. Oh, blasted waste of space! Do a war dance, off camera. Continue war dancing, or at least pulling the welding wire out of the machine for an extended period. Yep, it was kinking inside the hose. Okay, pull it all out, rerun fresh wire, time to weld again. And here we go, except I've forgotten to turn the welding gas on, so I shall go and bang my head quietly against the wall for a moment, and then I'll come back and at long last, weld it properly. Okay, new day, new start. The next major phase is to work out how to hang the silencer, and the first step is to bolt up the front flange of the pipe and work out where the silencer needs to sit. The system will need welding together so as to point the silencer up a bit, so I'm using a jack to support the pipe and a gearbox lift to support the silencer. As alignment is really important, I have of course remembered to hang the front end off its rubber mounts as the designers intended. It's not hanging off to one side, and therefore I didn't have to go back and do surreptitious off-camera cutting and re-welding later to correct a mysterious wonkiness issue. None of that would be professional. Having cleared up that important point, here's the left-hand rubber mount we're going to reuse. The wire wheel is great for removing rust and throwing it at me. Even better, in a rare moment of foresight, I've long since installed 4 big captive nuts that we can attach these mounts to. They're a bit on the big side at M12, but their location is stunningly convenient. I'm surprised too. I'm just going to make a rectangular steel plate and then weld the mount to it. A file is as good a scribing tool as any when you've misplaced everything else, and then I'm going to use the grinder to cut it out and round out the corners. As it's never wise to assume that anything has been done right around here, I want to measure the bolt hole positions accurately before I drill this plate, and the most accurate way to do this is to wind a couple of bolts into the holes and then measure them with a set of calipers. The dimension between the hole centres is equal to the min distance between the bolts plus 1 bolt shank diameter. With that established, I can drill it correctly, drilling into a block of wood as it helps to keep the drill centred and the hole round. And then, following this excess of thought, planning and care, it fits right first time. Yay me. I'll just show a quick shot of welding the mount to symbolise the process while hoping nobody notices I blew right through it because the metal's a bit thin. Then we can move on to paint, first having crudely masked the rubber. If you look carefully you'll see that it has been welded convincingly by processes or persons unknown. Once the paint is dry I can refit it to the silencer and we have a mount ready for a trial fit. Also yay me. Clearly we now need a second mount. Thankfully we've got to cut this off anyway because it seems to be held together by some sort of, well I don't know, chocolate icing? Volcanic rock? Probably best we get that off and replace it with the work of a true artist. At least I draw pictures sometimes. Anyway, here we go, angle grinder time. And if you can spot the moment at which I chop the mount off, you're doing better than me. It's just sort of there and then it isn't. Sleight of hand, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to run the wire wheel over this again to make sure it's got enough strength left, and after that I'll chop it up and adapt a mount plate so that I can butt weld the useful bit of the original mount to it, and then we can see about welding the other end of the mount to the silencer once everything's hanging in place. Ideally I'd be holding the mount with something other than my fingers. Ideals are great. I figure if I cut the middle of the plate down in width, leaving a couple of projecting wings, I can then fold the wings up and then adjust and trim them so that everything lines up. Folding the first one's always easy. For the second I'm using an old lathe tool as a spacer so I can still get it in the vise. I'm going for a full 90-degree bend here, though subsequently I found this was too much, but mild steel's pretty forgiving stuff. You know, don't get muddy footprints on the carpet and you're fine. Unbend it a bit and weld it, it won't crack on you. The next step is to weld the pointy end of the mount onto the silencer, so we need to check everything's aligned. And it's not. Turns out there are a couple of brackets getting in the way, and I figure if I don't remember what's bolted on there, they can't be wildly important, right? So that's that sorted. I'll just remove the silencer for the manyth time, and we'll wave an angle grinder at it until the brackets go away. Alright, with those out of the way, silencer back in, we can get on with the job. At this point it's probably worth pointing out that the two mounts have different jobs as well as carrying the weight of the silencer. The left-hand one mainly deals with fore and aft loads, while this one, the right-hand side one, is there to take side loads, so the attachment to the silencer body needs to cope with side forces without just bending and snapping off, or more likely fatiguing and fracturing the silencer body. The result in the end is much the same. Just welding the end of the mount onto the nearest bit of the silencer isn't going to cut it. Well, technically it is going to cut it, it's probably going to snap it, but you know what I mean. So I'm going to go a bit unorthodox and use a length of tube to create a longer, stronger mount with more stiffness. Nobody wants their exhaust falling off. Once it's all securely welded, I'm cutting the excess off both ends, mostly because I've got two nice chrome tailpipes already, and having a third galvanised steel one would look pretentious, unfinished and deluded at the same time, which is an achievement I hope I haven't managed anywhere else. Note to self, finish refitting bathroom. Now we need to fill the gap where the two sections of the exhaust system no longer quite meet. I should probably have trimmed the silencer inlet nice and square before I fitted it, but I'm not that smart. So once I've rehung the silencer for the n+1th time, I'll trim the main pipe in situ, and I will then remove the silencer for the n+1th time, and we'll chop it neatly. There's an efficiency improvement to be had in here somewhere, I suspect. Happily, because I live in what might as well be a scrapyard, well, happily is a stretch, I've got a spare chunk of the right sort of pipe to make a joining piece. I'm going to rough cut a chunk of it so that the rest can be bunged somewhere where I can fall over it, and then I'll rehang the silencer for the n+2th time and take measurements to trim the joining piece down to. Given that both ends of the pipes have been cut freehand, I'm taking measurements at multiple points around the circumference, or the gaps to be welded are likely to look like the Grand Canyon, only more exhausty. I've wrapped the makeup piece in masking tape for easy marking out, then I can trim it with the grinder. I don't mind holding two pieces together for welding, but three is asking for trouble, so I've decided to make it sort of self-aligning. I've welded washers on at 6 positions, which means I can slot everything together with a reasonable expectation that they'll stay reasonably well aligned. Then I'll tack weld around as much of the circumference as possible for stability, and can then remove the exhaust, grind off the washers and finish the welds. What could possibly go wrong? The answer, happily, appears to be not too much, although I did briefly worry that I might have set the exhaust on fire, which would be a first. But no, apparently not. So I can remove the silencer for the n+3th time, n+3rd time, and get on with welding it together. As usual, overlapping spots are functional and fully penetrated, but not pretty. Sometime I'm going to have to spend some quality time with this welder's settings and run some longer and prettier beads, but not in the middle of the night on a joint nobody's going to see anyway. Except you and everyone. Oh well. Time to chop off the last of the washers, some more easily than others, and finish the welding. The last thing we then need to do is put in a drain hole, as the new position of the silencer turns the whole exhaust into a U-trap, and it would be unfortunate to backfill a red-hot turbo with water just because I pointed the car downhill. Water misting is great, but it goes in the inlet, not up the exhaust. A drain hole at least gives us a fighting chance of getting the water out again, which is clearly a good thing. One worry I had about the exhaust was we might absorb all the ground clearance we'd painstakingly put in, but in the end I don't think it's so. It doesn't hang down any lower than the rest of the back end, and actually if I draw a line from the tyre to the spare wheel, it's actually the spare wheel that's setting the departure angle, not the exhaust. So I think we've got away with it. All that remains now is to test it, and drum roll please, the sound coming out of the exhaust is full of leaves. Guess that's what you get for stashing it on the ground for so long. Definitely a lot quieter though. All things considered, I think we're one step closer to having a running vehicle. Hope you've enjoyed watching. Please let me know what you think in the comments, and if you're not already subscribed and would like to follow the rest of this build, well, you know what to do. Hope to see you in the next one.